Michael Landon, the star, the writer, the producer, the director, my husband. He was carrying a full load.
She was America's mother. For 14 seasons, Karen Grassle stepped into the role of Caroline Ingalls, the steady hand, the moral center, the woman who held her family together through prairie storms and frontier hardship. Millions of viewers grew up watching her on screen. But at 82 years old, Karen Grassle is finally revealing what really happened behind the cameras. And the story her co-star Michael Landon's legacy didn't want told is reshaping everything we thought we knew about Little House on the Prairie. What happened on set? Why did her scenes shrink? And why did she stay silent for so long? The letter arrived when Karen Grassle was 60 years old. Michael Landon was dying. Cancer had invaded his body in 1991, the same year Little House had finished its run. By 1992, when she learned he was fading fast, Grassle made a choice that would haunt her for decades. Instead of airing decades of grievances, instead of finally speaking the truth, she wrote him a letter of forgiveness. Private, quiet, the letter of someone who had learned, over a 14-year journey, that silence was survival. But silence, she would eventually learn, came at a cost. Decades passed. The nostalgia surrounding Little House only grew. Michael Landon became a television legend, celebrated for his vision, his charm, his creative genius. And Karen Grassle remained frozen in time, grateful to be remembered at all. It was a kind of invisibility that felt like respect. Until it wasn't. Karen Grassle wasn't born to play Caroline Ingalls. She was born to want more. Growing up in Berkeley, California, in the 1940s, Grassle discovered acting as a teenager. It was escape. It was power. By her 20s, she had trained at the prestigious American Conservatory Theater, performing in off-Broadway productions and regional theater. She was serious about her craft. The kind of actress who studied Stanislavski, who believed acting was a form of truth-telling, who wanted roles that meant something. She was not looking to be cast as a mother on a family drama. But in 1974, when Little House on the Prairie premiered, the role of Caroline Ingalls changed everything, just not in the way she hoped. The show became a phenomenon. Instantly, the public responded to its simplicity, its family values, its frontier mythology, and they responded to Karen Grassle. She embodied something Americans wanted to believe in: steadiness, sacrifice, unconditional love. She became, overnight, a cultural icon. But icons have a cost. And Karen Grassle was about to pay IT to AS Little House became a global sensation. Karen Grassle found herself in a position most actors dream of: a steady job, an iconic role, a character that would stay with her forever. Michael Landon, meanwhile, controlled everything. He didn't just star in the show. He created it, produced it, wrote many of its episodes, and often directed. He was a vision behind Little House. The man responsible for transforming Wilder's books into the sentimental television landscape America fell in love with. Landon was already a major star from Bonanza. Now, on Little House, he was untouchable. The show won awards. Grassle received recognition for her performance. Reviewers praised her warmth, her authenticity, her ability to make Caroline Ingalls feel like a real woman, not just a supporting mother. She was beloved, and she was, by industry standards, underpaid. The disparity was stark. Landon, as creator and lead, commanded a salary far exceeding what Grassle received. By the second or third season, she did what many actors do. She asked for a raise. She had become essential to the show's formula. She deserved compensation that reflected that. Michael Landon's response was swift, and according to Grassle, retaliatory. This is where the story shifts. This is where the public image and the private reality began to split. After Grassle asked for more money, her role visibly changed. Episodes that centered on Caroline suddenly featured fewer scenes. Lines were cut. The character that had been positioned as the moral anchor of the entire show began to fade into the background. It was subtle enough that casual viewers might not notice, but Grassle noticed. Everyone on set noticed, and Landon's behavior toward her changed too. According to Grassle's own account, shared years later in interviews and her memoir, Landon's humor turned crude. Comments about her appearance, jokes designed to diminish. The kind of casual cruelty that male power figures inflicted on female co-stars in the 1970s and 80s, behavior that was normalized on sets, laughed off, dismissed as just how he was. She was told she was being oversensitive. She was told the humor was harmless. She was told to be grateful she had a job at all. In an industry where one wrong word about being difficult could end a career, Grassle did what millions of women have done. She endured. But endurance leaves marks. Invisible ones. The kind that don't show on screen but accumulate year after year until they become part of you. The power imbalance on set was absolute. Landon held every lever. He could expand your role or erase you. He could make you the center of an episode or reduce you to background. He could treat you with respect or humiliate you in front of the crew. And because he was the talent, the creator, the vision, he faced no consequences for any of it. For Karen Grassle, the workplace became a calculation. Stay quiet, stay employed, stay relevant. Speak up, risk everything. But there was more beyond the pay disparity and the behavioral shift. Another tension was building on the Little House set, one that would become central to Grassle's later account. Michael Landon's personal life was becoming the subject of quiet, troubled whispers among crew members. He was having an affair. Not just any affair, an affair with a significantly younger crew member named Cindy Clerico. The relationship was allegedly conducted openly, visibly, almost defiantly on set. Clerico was present during filming. Landon made little effort to hide it. This wasn't just a private scandal. It was a display of power. It was a statement. I can do whatever I want, and no one will stop me. For Grassle, watching this unfold added another layer to the dynamic she was navigating. Here was a man who exercised absolute control over every aspect of the show, creatively, financially, professionally, and he wielded that control with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing there are no real consequences. Not in Hollywood in the 1970s. Not for a man like Michael Landon. The affair would eventually lead to Landon's divorce. He would later marry Clerico, and over time, the narrative would shift. The affair would be reframed as a love story. Cindy would become Michael's devoted wife. The complexity and the power dynamics and the damage caused would fade into the background, replaced by a simpler, more romantic version of events. But Grassle never forgot, and she lived with the knowledge every day on set that she had been diminished by a man who faced no accountability, that her sacrifice of her voice had been extracted under duress, that the image of wholesome family values this show projected was built on a foundation of unchecked male power. Stay with us, because what Karen Grassle does next, and when she finally decides to speak, is where this story transforms entirely. Michael Landon was dying. Pancreatic cancer. The man who had controlled every frame of Little House on the Prairie for 14 years was facing his own finale. Karen Grassle was given the opportunity that many people in her position never get. The chance to confront, to finally say the things she'd swallowed for years, to finally break the silence and let him know the impact of his behavior. She could have written a different kind of letter, but she didn't. Instead, Karen Grassle wrote a letter of forgiveness. It was, according to her later interviews and memoir, not a negotiation or a demand for accountability. It was a private moment of closure, a woman choosing not to carry rage into the final chapter of someone else's life. Whether that forgiveness was genuine or strategic, whether it came from a place of spiritual growth or from decades of conditioning that taught her conflict wasn't worth the cost, the world would never know because she kept it private. Landon died in July 1991. Wait, let me correct that. He was diagnosed in 1991 and died in July 1991. Actually, no, he died in July 1991 from pancreatic cancer. The timeline, he died in 1991. The letter would have been written near his death. The exact chronology matters less than the moment itself. Grassle chose forgiveness over reckoning, silence over confrontation, grace over anger. And then, for nearly 3 more decades, she stayed silent. She gave interviews about the show. She attended reunions. She participated in nostalgia-driven television events. But she didn't tell the story of what it had actually cost her to be Ma. She didn't speak about the pay disparity, the retaliation, the behavioral shift the power dynamics. The narrative stayed. Little House was a wholesome family drama. Michael Landon was a visionary. Karen Grassle was grateful to have been part of something beautiful. That was the deal, it seemed. Stay silent and remain part of the legacy. Speak and risk being labeled as bitter, jealous, difficult. The exact label she'd been afraid of her entire career. Until 2021, AT 78 years old, Karen Grassle published her memoir, Bright Lights, Prairie Dust. And in those pages, she finally told the story, not as an attack, not as revenge, but as truth. She wrote about the pay disparity. She wrote about the behavioral shift after asking for a raise. She wrote about Landon's affairs, conducted openly on set. She wrote about the retaliation, the shrinking role, the silence she had maintained as a survival strategy. She wrote about the cost of playing America's mother, while feeling unseen as a person. The memoir was a revelation, but not a scandal. It was received as a reclamation. Here was Karen Grassle, decades later, finally claiming ownership of her own story. Not for money, not for revenge, but for truth and for the record. And something shifted. The publication of Karen Grassle's memoir opened a door that had been locked for 50 years. Suddenly, other people began to speak. Crew members corroborated her account. Other actresses who had worked with Landon on different projects came forward with similar stories of his behavior. The power plays, the retaliation, the casual cruelty, the unchecked authority. The legacy of Little House on the Prairie began to be re-examined, not as a condemnation of the show itself, but as a more honest reckoning with his creator and the environment he created on set. Michael Landon's reputation didn't collapse. He was already deceased, and his cultural mythology was too deeply embedded, but it became more complicated, more human, more flawed, and Karen Grassle's position in the story shifted entirely. Here's what stays with us about Karen Grassle's story. It's not a story about public victory or vindication. She didn't sue. She didn't write an expose designed to destroy Landon's legacy. She didn't become an activist. She lived a full life after Little House, acting, teaching, writing, raising her daughter, building a genuine career beyond that single iconic role. What her story reveals is something more universal and more painful. The cost of silence, the way women in male-dominated industries learn to swallow their voices, accept diminishment, and frame their own survival as gratitude. The way a workplace where one person holds all the power becomes a place where everyone else has to negotiate the space between safety and truth. Karen Grassle didn't just play a character who held her family together through hardship. She lived that character's lesson, that sometimes survival means saying nothing, and sometimes freedom means finally saying something, even if it comes decades later. At 82, she chose to speak, not with rage, but with clarity, not to destroy, but to be heard. And in doing that, she gave permission to others to tell their own stories about what happens behind the curtains of beloved institutions. The Little House on the Prairie that Americans grew up with remains beautiful, but now we know it was built on a foundation that wasn't as wholesome as the image suggested. And Karen Grassle, no longer just Ma, but a woman with a voice and a story, is part of that reckoning. S.O. Here's what we're left with, a woman who chose silence for decades to keep her career safe, but who, at the end of her life, chose truth instead. The question isn't whether Michael Landon's behavior was justified. The evidence is clear that it wasn't. The question is this: how many more stories like Karen Grassle's are still locked away, waiting for permission to be told? How much do we lose when people have to choose between their careers and their truth? What do you think? Should more people in her position speak out, even if it costs them? Or is there wisdom in choosing peace over confrontation? Let us know in the comments. If you want more stories about the real lives behind beloved television, consider subscribing.